Welcome to the AINdebrief podcast. I'm Matt Thurber, Editor-in-Chief of AIN Media Group. We have some interesting guests today to talk about a rare but potentially deadly occurrence, an in-flight emergency over the ocean that might require ditching, and how to increase your chances of survival. Joining me today are Jim Stabile, CEO of Aeronautical Data Systems and an airline and corporate pilot. John Caneo, who currently flies a long-range Gulfstream and corporate service. And Andrew Loretta, Orbcomm Senior Director, Maritime Business Development. So today we're going to discuss over-ocean emergency situations and the tool that Jim's company has developed to help deal with these emergencies. John's going to talk to us about how he uses these tools in his day-to-day flying, and Andy will highlight the role that Orbcomm plays in supplying critical data to the Aeronautical Data Systems iPad apps, which go by the name Ergo. So Jim, let's start with you, and maybe you can briefly outline what is Ergo.
Ergo is it's a suite of software programs developed by my company, Aeronautical Data Systems, and it stands for Energy Resource Geographical Overlay. Ergo takes raw data from inside the aircraft and rearranges that data into a visual display so the user, the pilot in this case, can quickly assess their situation based on their resources. They can actually see on the screen instead of trying to make sense of a bunch of numbers on a chart. So we're providing the pilot with a visual interpretation of what's actually happening inside the flight deck. The standard solution for any flight emergency is to safely land the aircraft at an airport. If that is impossible, the next best solution is to land the aircraft at a point of quickest rescue. So using this as our baseline for any emergency, Matt, Ergo displays the aircraft position and then takes into account the resources on board. And for today's podcast, we're using fuel and oxygen. Converts those quantities into a distance that can be flown. These distances are shown on the computer or on the iPad screen as rings around the aircraft, distance rings. This provides the pilot, the dispatcher, or other users with an instantaneous visual picture of where it's safe to land given the fuel and oxygen resources on board. So the standard solution can be used for almost any critical aircraft emergency. In an emergency situation, when the operator is under great stress and task saturation, it provides a crystal clear answer to the critical question, where exactly am I and how far can I fly before I run out of these particular resources? And so you can think of Ergo as a translator, kind of similar to primitive AI that translates data into a visual picture of the current situation. Can be used for any time-based energy resource on the aircraft. But again, today we're just going to be talking about aircraft fuel and oxygen systems.
You've been flying for quite a while, Jim. How did you come up with this idea? Was it something that you felt like there was a missing link on when you were flying long over ocean routes?
Yes. This has been a lifetime project, Matt. We started this. It'll be 40 years ago this year, in 1982. I was flying for a company called National Distillers, and they were an early Gulfstream customer. They flew the first G1, the first G2, the first G3 that was ever made. And these pilots, this flight department knew everything about the aircraft because they went through certification. They went with flight testing, and so they had firsthand knowledge of the aircraft. And So when we began to talk about the oxygen system, we noticed at that time we were flying a Gulfstream 2 and a Gulfstream 3. Gulfstream 3 had more range, better aerodynamics than the Gulfstream 2. But we noticed when we looked at the oxygen system that there was considerable larger amount of oxygen supply in the G2 than the G3. So when we went to Gulfstream, they simply told us was that the reason for that is that there was greater range at lower altitudes on the Gulfstream 3. They had more fuel, better range, better aerodynamics. So in the event of a long overwater decompression, if they came down to 10,000 feet, how long could they stay there for? The G3 could stay there much longer, and therefore there was less of an oxygen requirement. They didn't have to fly higher to extend their range. So that's how we got into it. And then the other pilots in the flight department, and specifically the Bill Mack he helped me spearhead all of this. We began to call all the oxygen suppliers, and we began to, a 40-year journey to develop a solution that the pilot could easily understand what PSI meant in his airplane. And now what we've done, and we're trying to carry this to other energy resources on the airplane map. We're trying to translate all of those metrics into distance and time, and then display them on a map around the aircraft. Simple solution, simple for the pilot to simply look at it and see if he has enough on a geospatial mapping program.
So, Jim, maybe you can talk about the contrast between the 1980s and now in terms of the technology, because obviously back then you didn't have iPads with georeferenced own ship position and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a journey for us as well. When we started out with tabulated information, and the visual display that we had to use, Matt, we had to use charts and graphs. And that in itself requires another level of interpretation to understand exactly what you were looking at, because our first obstacle that we had to achieve was to turn the oxygen system, which is normally sized in psi. We had to translate that into time remaining, and that took us at least a decade to understand how that fit into the airplane. And then once we were able to do that, and by the way, these charts were all hand drawn. So I had an old drafting table and a T-square and things that most people don't even know about anymore. And that's how we created these documents. And then we were able to automate that with the advent of the computer coming online. We were able to use the computer and certain CAD CAM programs to duplicate the charts, and then um, when we started to get into iPads and apps, we were able to actually give it that AI effect as though you were actually there. You could see yourself in real time on a global mapping display, and now we could take that time and convert it into a distance. So we originally started out with rings that gave you a time, but then we changed it to distance because that was something that quickly resonated with the pilot, and he could understand in an instant, whether he had enough of that resource or not, just by looking on the map.
So basically, the Ergo apps show the airplane's position on the map with distance rings for oxygen and fuel, and you can quickly see if there's a place you can land inside those rings, right?
Yeah, and there was a genesis to what took place here, Matt. So originally we put a layer of data that the user could look at it on the spatial map, and that were airports. We had airports all over the world, and if there was an airport within the smallest of the two rings, then you had enough of both resources. But when we started to go into the Pacific, we quickly realized that there was no help in terms of land based resources or assets that the pilot could readily use. So that is what prompted us to begin to look at the AIS data. We knew that ships were out there, and now what we wanted to be able to do was, in the same fashion that we displayed the airports, we wanted to display ship information. And what this does, this opens up an infrastructure that's existed long before aviation was even out there, but it's given us the ability to tap into this resource in the event of an emergency. So it's really it's a great tool, and I've used this for over 10 years, and I can't tell you how amazed I still am to fly for 10, 11, 12 hours in open Ergo and be able to pull up a ship and look out the window, and by God, there it is. So it's really a great tool to have on board. It's essential information, as I see it, for any type of overwater flying.
So just to clarify, what you're talking about is Ergo not only displays the fuel and oxygen distance rings, but also it can display the position of vessels on the ocean itself. And that gives you an option for having some ability to ditch near a ship instead of just out in the middle of the ocean with no assistance nearby, right?
Correct. And there's an evolution that takes place as we begin to develop these apps. Something that we're working on right now is to provide another layer of data of drilling rig, fixed and mobile drilling rigs all over the world. There's another 12,700 fixed or mobile rigs worldwide that, in the event of an emergency, that represents an asset or some place where the pilot can ditch by, where he may be able to get out of the water and extend his survival. So there's a lot of things that come into play by being able to take all this voluminous amount of data, Matt, and to put it into a very simple, easy to read format for the pilot.
So let's ask Andy to jump in now and tell us a little bit about the information that Orbcomm is providing to aeronautical data systems to plot the vessel locations on the Ergo app. Andy, this is using the AIS system, and maybe you could start out by explaining a little bit about what AIS is and how it works and what information is available.
Sure, yeah. And thank you for having me on. So the AIS is the automatic identification system for maritime vessels. And what that is basically a beacon that sends over VHF the information of the vessel that transmitter is on. So it would be its name, its heading, its speed, its IMO number. There are a number of different fields of information that is provided in the AIS message. And that message is being broadcast anywhere from every 5 seconds to a minute, depending on where that vessel is operating. AIS is mandated for carriage by the International Maritime Organization for vessels, large commercial vessels, anything over 300 gross tons. And so that would be oil tankers, container ships, cruise ships, bulk carriers, vessels of that size. The technology was originally developed for collision avoidance. So in areas where vessels would not be able to see each other because of fog or other adverse conditions, this technology allows the vessel to see another vessel basically on its navigation chart. So that information was um, originally a ship-to-ship solution for vessels not running into one another. But as time went on, port authorities and other maritime authorities found that they could put AIS receiver antennas in coastal areas and in ports to be able to watch the vessel traffic that was moving in and around its coastal waters. So you started to get a picture of vessels about anywhere from up to 20 nautical miles, in some cases further than that, of the activity that's going on around those areas, the coastal areas. So we took that a step further at Orbcom. In about 2008, we launched satellites that have AIS receiver payloads and that can pick up those messages from space. And so we're able to see AIS messages all over the world in the open ocean, and in addition to coastline areas. So we've extended that range of view of vessels that carry AIS, and we feed that data into applications, different kinds of applications for commercial purposes or for government and maritime security purposes. And then, of course, we also provide that data to the Ergo application, which Jim was just describing.
So Jim, can you describe what the pilot actually sees on the Ergo app in terms of the vessels? I mean, do you see them just like steaming along there? What does it look like?
Well, they come up as an additional icon. So pilots who are familiar looking at an airport icon, the same thing exists inside the open waters, and so we have little ship icons there, and the icons, they represent they have a shape to them, and the pointed part of that shape denotes the direction that they're traveling in, and then you can click on the icon and open it up, and it will give you the essential information that Andy just described. It will give you the ship location, the name, the number. All of these things are important. So in the event of an emergency, first of all, you're going to know the ship name. Your iPad app is going to be able to transmit this information in a voice distress message to all ships within VHF range.
Okay, so you've got all the information about the vessel. You can actually navigate to near where the vessel's going to be because you can see which direction it's going. But what if you want to get hold of the vessel and let them know that you're coming? How can you do that?
After we had built the app and we started looking at all the airports, and we noticed that there were no ships, and then we installed the ships, and then we noticed that we had all these ships, but how are we going to contact them? And so we spent a considerable amount of time and resources, and we developed a system that would allow us to take the iPad information and integrate it into a ship's DSC system, that's digital selective calling, equal to what we have in the aircraft as cell call. It's a specific identifier for that ship, and we were able to take iPad information and transmit that. We had to rewrite the code. We transmitted that over the radio, and that would be received by all of these vessels within VHF range, and it would come up as a text message on their radios. That, however, is controlled by the FCC, and we are before them right now with the help of Andy and Orbcom. We're before them right now. We have an experimental license, and we're awaiting approval to get what's known as an MMSI number. And we don't need to get into that, but we need to meet the requirements for the regulatory authority to have the ability to transmit the data. However, what we can transmit is we can use the voice message. We can transmit a distress message using voice. That is legal and available to all flight crews. The only requirement is having an FCC radio telephone license. And as you know, we all have that. So what we did is we went ahead and we took all the work out of it. We took the iPad information. We crafted a distress message written maritime vernacular with the help of the folks from the Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, Long Island. And now what happens at the touch of a button, it will transmit this voice distress message, and it will give them all the important data that they need to plot where the aircraft's at. So it'll give you latitude, longitude, all written in maritime vernacular. Again, that's different than how we receive it in the aviation world. So that was important, because if somebody in distress is just putting numbers out there, it's going to get lost in the transmission. All the terminology that we use, again, was in maritime speak, and we completed this voice distress message. I have an example here I can play at the end, but what it does is it gives a complete description of where you're at, altitude, airspeed, time to touchdown. And then what'll happen is it repeats itself every 2.5 minutes without any pilot input. It just grabs the information from the iPad, whatever the iPad's sensing, and it again repeats everything, but with all updated information. So in effect, people inside the ship, people on the bridge of the ship, the pilots would be able to plot where that aircraft is going using the latitude, longitude, and the information that's in this voice distress message. So what it does, it takes a huge workload away from the pilot. The pilot just has to push a button, and this thing begins to transmit by itself. So it really saves the pilot. It's like pulling a fire alarm, Matt. Pulling a fire alarm, and that's all he does. One pull, and then the rest of it is all automated. And it just doesn't go to one ship. It goes to any ship that's within VHF range. And so right now, in order to do this, we've used what's known as COTS, components off the shelf. It's a standard marine band VHF radio that's been approved by the authorities, and it gets connected either through Bluetooth or by a wire to the iPad, and it transmits over the emergency channel 16 frequency. And we've been able to transmit and receive radio calls up to 180 to 200 miles at about 36,000 feet in the aircraft that I was flying at that time. So you really have great coverage in the event of an emergency. This is and the good part about it is if you get busy, you don't have to do anything. Just make sure that you start the transmission, just like manually activating your ELT.
So, Andy, maybe you could give us an idea. Is the maritime industry excited about this setup, and are they happy to be working with the aviation industry on that? And then maybe Jim, you can address that too.
Yeah, so this was a very interesting application that Jim had brought to us because prior we had not thought of this one before, where an aircraft is able to visualize the AIS or the vessel targets below it. And if it did come under distress and had to ditch the aircraft, then it could identify a vessel nearby or even just a traffic lane of vessels and be able to guide itself as close as possible to one of these vessels, obviously without hitting it, but getting close to it and being able to seek assistance. And if it's able to even hail the vessel, well, then that's even better. You may think that it would be obvious to a vessel that there's a plane that's coming down and ditching nearby it, but if it's at night or if it's under adverse weather conditions and it can't see it, then obviously being able to radio it and hail it is even better. But just the idea of being able to see somebody below you, I think, is a lot more reassuring to the pilot. And from a maritime standpoint, it falls right in the safety of life at sea mission, which, in every mariner's case is to offer assistance to somebody that's in distress on the high seas, regardless of what their situation is. So that's a pretty normal thing for mariners to do, and if they can help out in any way they can, that's great, and they're more than happy to do so. I think where you do maybe get hung up a little bit is in that the communication between the vessel and the aircraft, and getting through a little bit of the bureaucratic, paperwork of being able to use some of the different radio transmissions to do that. But that's where Jim has been working pretty diligently with both the aviation and the maritime authorities to try and bridge that gap.
And Jim, you've been able to bridge that gap, right?
As Andy has pointed out, it's there's a bureaucracy, and it's just not limited to the U.S. This is a global effort that we're spearheading right now, and so we've gotten a great reception from the U.S. The Coast Guard has been tasked with representing us at the IMO and ICAO level, so they've been very helpful in that regard. Again, the process is slow. There is an old system. This DSC system is it's a very regulated system, and now what we're asking to do is to be able to open up just a part of it, just for emergencies, so we can be able to tap into those resources. And some of the advantages is going to be a reduction in effort on part of the SARS operation. This is, in our opinion, helpful to the Coast Guard. Most importantly, it's helpful to the pilots. In looking a little bit forward into the future, Matt, we may see a situation where we might be able to help our brothers on the maritime side by being able to receive their distress messages on the radios that we use in the aircraft. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. This is kind of an untapped region, and it's pretty exciting. So. One last thing I like to say that Andy touched on that I thought was very important that we just haven't talked about yet. Right now in the aviation world, ditching is regulated to today VFR. I mean, if you're going to ditch an aircraft, you basically have to acquire the aircraft to brief any type of ditching. But now, having the AIS data on your iPad, we don't have to visually acquire the ship. So what that does for us on the aviation side of the house in terms of safety is it allows us to ditch first and foremost at night. It allows us to ditch in low visibility or low ceiling conditions. And to me, that's a monumental improvement, and it provides a clear path for the pilot to follow in the event that he's forced with this terrible decision. So the most important thing that we're looking to do is to reduce time of rescue, and that's what we're trying to do by getting them as close to the ship as possible.
So, Jim, how does this all fit into a flight operations safety management system? Is this one part of that SMS?
Yes. Right now we're specifically speaking about the AIS data. What this app really does, in my opinion, is it begins to standardize our industry and is helping us to align with the maritime industry. And so when I talk about standardization, we're talking about having to land off-site. And in this instance, in the ocean, we're going to have to ditch the aircraft. We're providing everybody with one standard, one level of safety. We're giving them information that's not available, and the focus is going to be, I want to get as close as possible to this ship. Another thing that we haven't spoken about is that pilots are able to identify the AIS data. They can validate what's on the iPad by using their onboard weather radar. As long as their radar is equipped to paint targets offshore. There's some radars in today's world that will not allow that to happen, but other radars will allow you to paint ships, and you can do this and I can tell you, after plotting and validating over 1,000 ships, you become very good at being able to identify the shape of the ship and the outline of the ship, and I can tell you what direction the ship is traveling in just based on the radar return. So what we're doing is we're putting information out there, and as we do that, we're beginning to develop all these other marvelous ways to increase our safety, and that's just one of them.
Jim, can you summarize what the 3 different Ergo apps do? I understand there's 3 apps: Ergo Blue, Ergo 180, and Ergo 360.
Sure, Matt. Each product was developed in response to market demand. We initially, our initial program was the most comprehensive of all. That was Ergo 360. But then we started to have a lot of our customers come back. The Ergo 360 really was the Cadillac of all of our programs, and that was built for the long haul pilot. But then there was another section of the aviation universe there, and we had the private pilots as an example. And they didn't need all the bells and whistles that came with Ergo 360, and of course, there was a price associated with it. So we were able to redesign each app for that specific market. So just to recap, Ergo Blue is strictly ships. It's strictly maritime data with a distress call, real simple to use. Pilot just comes on, plugs into airports, and he gets the ship display. On Ergo 180, which is in the middle of Ergo Blue and Ergo 360, it was a little bit more manual. It was built for the private pilot or for the light jet pilot that didn't need all of the automation that's associated with Ergo 360. And then, of course, Ergo 360, which is almost totally automated from the flight plan and right into the iPad. So I hope that explains it.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, the full up Ergo 360 app is designed for pressurized jets, and the pilots want to know their resources on board, like oxygen and fuel, in case of an emergency.
Yes, and I should have added that in there, Matt. Not only are the ships available, but there's fuel and oxygen analysis that's available for the pilot to use in the event of a depressurization or any type of fuel or oxygen contingency.
Great, perfect. So, John, you are a long distance over ocean flying pilot and a user of Ergo. Can you tell us more about how you heard about Ergo and how you guys use it in your flight department?
Matt, I fly for a large Part 91 flight department, which includes a Gulfstream G650, a Falcon 900EX Easy, and an Augusta 109 helicopter. We've been customers of aeronautical data systems for over 7 years. Came to find out about this company through might have been a tug meeting in Teterboro, or we've I can't exactly remember how we were first introduced, but the the product was introduced to us by Jim, who came to our hangar and showed us the website and the app for the Ergo 360 initially, of which we utilize all three services that he provides. We are an international and domestic flying company. We do international flying over water, extended over water flights, which we utilize the services of Ergo 360 and Ergo Blue quite often. The Ergo 360, which was the initial app that we had used, was a more comprehensive service. We utilize that for our oxygen and fuel requirement calculations whenever flying over water and to remote areas. What really drew me to this and us was both the textual data of the oxygen and fuel requirements, as well as the graphical depictions that we could have on our smart tablets. One of the things that we worked with Jim was setting up with our flight planning provider and our trip support teams to work with him to be able to have the textual data sent to us with our flight planning packages, and putting it as basically part of our master document for the different contingencies for equal time point alternates that we would be potentially using over a flight, typically over like the North Atlantic on the way to Europe. It gives us, as part of our risk management process for these flights, we feel it's very important to have that information at our disposal in the cockpit, as well as having the information being able to display on the smart tablets. What we've been impressed with was the accuracy, which we have checked while doing the flying, for both the oxygen and the fuel requirements for the trip. We've noticed that it is a great support to our flight planning trip support team calculations for fuel burns, with the knowledge that if there was a contingency, that we would have the ability to trust the calculations that Ergo 360 has come up with.
So, John, is it also helpful in terms of risk management to be able to know exactly where ships are when you're flying over the ocean?
And absolutely, that was a newer portion of the app that had come along that Jim genius that he came up with. The ability for us to be able to see ships where, regardless of the weather, of the time of day, we can display the ships in proximity to our position. Not only display where ships are located from our present position, but also the names of the ships, the types of ships, the direction they're going, and used to be able to calculate whether or not in an emergency situation, if we did have to ditch, to be able to pick and choose a particular ship to actually try to ditch near. That would give us the greatest survivability or the greatest opportunity for rescue.
Excellent. And so is this a part of your regular flight department training program to make sure all the pilots know how to use it and have it installed on their tablets?
We all have them installed on our tablets. We do discuss that as part of our pre-flight briefing whenever we're over remote areas, whether it's an AR route on our way to Florida on the Falcon, or it's over the middle of the Atlantic on the way to Europe. We brief how to use it, to go over it again, because we don't do a lot of these trips, and any questions are resolved prior to the trip. Jim has made it easy by working with our flight management team, flight planning team, where he will send the information, and if it is, for instance, an over water to Europe trip, where all of the ETP information is downloaded into our app automatically from him based on the trip planning that was made by our provider. So it gives us up to date up to date as our flight plan is, all the information that's required as far as contingencies for oxygen and fuel planning for ETP alternates, as well as ship location.
Great. So Ergo is an important part of your safety toolbox, it sounds like.
It is we consider it an important part of our risk management process for these types of flights, definitely.
Great. Thank you, John. Jim, it looks like John's flight department has incorporated Ergo into its risk management system. And as I understand it, Ergo could be just part of a flight department's safety management system, right?
Yeah, exactly, Matt. You know, what it does is it provides the pilot with information that's not readily available. He has it at his fingertips. It certainly helps in the SMS part of any flight department. But I'd like to point out again that one of the more important things that we're bringing to the table is the fact that we've expanded the ditching safety envelope from not just day VFR, but now the pilots can ditch at night. They can ditch in low ceiling or low visibility conditions, never ever having to see the ship anymore because they have it already on the iPad app. Ostensibly, they can shoot an instrument approach using LNAV, VNAV, in some pretty bad conditions. So I think that's a big factor. Hopefully it never happens, but if it should, you've got the information on board. And I think that's what we're trying to provide to the industry.
So, Jim, you've also experimented with some actual scenarios using the X-Plane desktop flight simulator as well, right? And can you kind of summarize what you found from these practice situations?
Yeah, they were very interesting, Matt. As a matter of fact, John was one of the participants in it. One of the things that we uncovered was that when we so let me just try to frame this quickly. What we did is using X-Plane, we were able to insert the iPad right inside the flight deck. And part of the training would be that we would show the customer how to take the data off the iPad, how they would harvest that information and then put it into their FMS. And so when that was over, we would bring them to the middle of an overwater leg. And in this situation, it was a flight to the Caribbean. And we'd give them a decompression, loss of an engine down to 10,000 feet. And we would turn the aircraft over to the customer and say, okay, I'm your pilot now. All you have to do is make the decisions as to what we do next. And I want to say almost hands down, there was a significant delay in trying to determine what information was available to the customer on the flight deck or the pilot on the flight deck at that time. The FMS was, giving the information that was at altitude. And so we were able to quickly point out using the Ergo 360 app that just taking raw data, information that was right before you in this critical situation and putting it into the app would give you that information that you needed to assess whether you could stay at 10,000 feet or whether you had to fly at a higher altitude, whether you had fuel limitations, whether you had oxygen limitations. So it was a really useful tool because it got rid of a lot of the confusion. But we saw that almost across the board, Matt.
So if a potential customer wants to see a demonstration of how this works, you could show them, right?
Oh, absolutely. And they could call us up. Everything you can do, of course, now remotely using Zoom. Yeah, the X-Plane was a great tool for us. We were also able to ditch the aircraft, and you could you could take yourself out of the flight deck and actually see yourself ditching on the outside of the airplane. So that was interesting, but it gives you another perspective that you don't always see, and I think that was the importance of that training.
Why are the Ergo apps so important if ocean ditchings are such a rare occurrence?
So up until now, this level of automation as well as the visual data was simply not available. But now it is. And it should be every bit as important as bringing along a fire extinguisher, an ELT, a crash axe, a life preserver, a life raft, Arctic survival gear. I mean, you name it. This should become an essential part of any overwater emergency equipment. And as far as I'm concerned and my company's concerned, it's our obligation to fly as safely as possible and be prepared in the off chance that this event may happen. And I think it was Ben Franklin that coined the phrase, failing to plan is planning to fail. So we just feel that this is an additional layer of safety. It's important. It's reasonably priced, and it should be a part of any overwater survival type of equipment.
So, Jim, where can people find the Ergo apps?
So the apps are found in the App Store. Right now, it's only iOS available for Apple products, but we are working for other platforms. They can also come to our website, which is www.aidsopp.com, and you can get some more information there. There's several products. One of them requires that there's an evaluation of your oxygen system, so we can get the right information in there. But that's all part of the service. So, it's on our website. So please check us out when you can.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for telling us about these important safety products and considerations for the rare but probably inevitable chance that an aircraft is going to have to ditch in the ocean.
And Matt, on behalf of myself at ADS, and I'm sure I speak for Andy Loretta, we really appreciate the work that AIN does and has done over the years to take a look at new technology that's out there and to let the market fairly evaluate it. So we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this podcast. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much for helping us understand more about AIS and what Orbcomm does.
Thank you very much for having me on.